High functioning anxiety. Now, when you hear those words, what's the image that springs to mind? I wouldn't be surprised it's of an executive flying around the world, racing from meeting to meeting, always on their mobile phone or on their laptop and holding conferences, and someone who is terribly, terribly important, and the whole world would fall apart if they didn't do their job. You might be surprised to know actually all of us are capable of, and probably do, function at a level of high level anxiety. And the reason for that is because all of us at some stage will experience the feelings of having so much to do, of being there for everyone else, of taking so much on board and being too afraid of saying that either we can't cope or we're not quite feeling ourselves, that we are that close to burnout. And it doesn't matter whether we are a C-suite executive or whether we are a stay-at-home mum. This is something that we all have the potential and the capacity to experience. And that's why my conversation today is so incredible. I'm joined by Dr. Lalitaa Suglani, who has written a book all about high-functioning anxiety. And in it, we discuss how parents can keep an eye out for their children who may be experiencing high levels of anxiety, what signs to look out for, how we can look out for those signals and signs in ourselves in terms of how we feel mentally and how we can feel physically, and how we can be there for other people. If we see that maybe someone isn't behaving in quite their normal way, what are the best steps that we can take to be a supportive friend, a supportive partner, or really just a supportive person? Enjoy. Hello, Lalitaa. I'm so looking forward to our conversation today. High functioning anxiety is sort of the strap line for what we're going to discuss, but I know that we're going to go off on some beautiful tangents. But if you'd like to, I suppose, first of all, introduce yourself and explain how you came to be such an expert in high functioning anxiety and why you decided to write a book about it.
Thank you, Andrea. And I'm really excited to be here and just share more about what high functioning anxiety actually is. But before stepping into that, so I'm Lalitaa, I'm a psychologist, and I specialize in working with high achievers or individuals who present being very high functioning. But behind the scenes, there's a completely different story going on. We are catastrophizing, we're worrying about everything, we're worried to disappoint others, we're constantly thinking, what if this happens or what if this happens? And living a life where we are very disconnected from ourselves because people see us as a completely different version of what is actually going on. And often it's because we shame that part away, or we feel like people aren't going to accept that part. And for years, it's the way that I have been in the world. And through my own lived experiences, I understood this is what's going on and this is what's happening, and feeling that disconnection, but also knowing when we then start showing up authentically by bringing the two sides together, just how empowering that is to start living without that catastrophizing going on within us. We show up very differently, and it's just trying to get that message out to people that they don't have to live that disconnection, because with that also comes loneliness. With that also comes anxiety on a day-to-day basis that is driving you to make decisions for you, which is just really sad. And I just want to wake people up to what high functioning anxiety actually is.
It's so important that you know that you do get your message out there, that you do as many podcasts as possible and as many interviews as possible, because everything you said has resonated with me. Anyone who knows my story knows that this is something that I have experienced myself and continue to experience. I think you don't, it's not like, you take a magic pill or you go to the gym once and that's it, everything is all amazing. It's something that you have to be aware of and keep on top of, because life will ebb and flow. So you mentioned that obviously through your personal perspective, and then you began obviously digging into it professionally. What was your personal perspective on this, and at what age did it start?
Well, it probably started from a very young age. So I am born as a second generation individual in ethnic minority. Let me just get that right. But this is where your brain starts buzzing and it's like, oh, say this and say this and say this. So just like what you said, is it never goes away. And I just want to try and let other people know that it's not this idea of like being perfect, which is what we grow up being. And so for me, I was very compliant. I was essentially like the good girl, the one who just followed the rules, did everything that everyone else wanted of me, and just showing up in that way. So you do naturally feel disconnected from yourself, thinking, I need to please everyone else. So you're very hyper vigilant. And that's the way that I lived life, was very hypervigilant on what others wanted from me. And I wasn't connected to like what was right for me. And I didn't even realize it was anxiety. So I would get like stomach aches, I'd get like the racing heart, I'd feel like the sweaty palms, but I'd just ignore it all because I didn't realize that that's what was anxiety. So it was only until I started, I actually went to university, and they started to realize like, oh, okay, is everything okay? Because I had to have my own therapy, because I was studying therapy, psychology, counseling psychology. And as part of that, you have to have your own therapy. And I was like, there's nothing wrong with me. I don't need to go to therapy. But little did I know, when I went into that space and all these things started coming out, and I was like, oh, because it was just a really empowering space to just feel safe, being held by someone who just is able to navigate and know how to get information out of you in a very beautiful way, that you don't feel like you're under threat, or you don't feel like it's you're being judged in any way. So when all of that happened, I realized, okay, there's more going on here for me, and I started to just unlearn these patterns. And then the next stage for me was like to relearn. How do I now need to be in the world and show up in that space? So my early experiences, they really did nurture me in a certain way, and I presented in that way. And it was only until I got to a point where the rules wouldn't work anymore in that therapy space. And I almost had the mirror up to me to try and understand my patterns. And then I was able to then move forward. And this whole idea of people pleasing, being a perfectionist, being the empath, being the one there for everyone else, it's exhausting. It's really, really exhausting. It can lead to burnout. It can lead to loneliness, which it did for me. And day to day, you're living with anxiety. And I'm just like, it doesn't have to be that way.
It makes me so sad to hear that, and I'm sorry to hear that you went through that, and I understand how painful that is. But as you were speaking, I was just thinking of so many people that I know,
Yeah.
people that will listen to this and think that's me, but I
Mm.
don't know how to shift that pattern. And before we look into the techniques that you then used on yourself, and then obviously that you've since gone on to teach other people, I'd be interested to understand if there are different techniques perhaps that you'd use at different stages of your life, because obviously you were sort of a young adult and going off to university. But from my experience, I know there are sort of teenagers who are going through this for various different reasons. However, they do tend to be mainly female, the people that I understand that are feeling this way. So I wanted to ask you, is this something that you found, that it tends to be almost like a good girl syndrome, where you are very people pleasing, you're very acquiescing, you don't want to take up too much space, you maybe there's other people in your family who are a bit disruptive and a bit loud, and you see how that makes your parents angry, and you think, right, I'm not going to do that. But you kind of put lots of pressure on yourself that, one, I'm not going to cause any problems, but
Yeah.
you kind of take on the world's problems and make it your responsibility. And I tend to hear this for either eldest children or females. Is this something that this is just my amateur observation, but is this something that you've seen?
I have seen, it's interesting because I have male clients and they're like, you always use good girl. What about me? And I'm like, no, I understand that. So
Yeah.
I wonder if we learn to mask in a certain way and naturally the female becomes the caretaker, but it's not always the case in that way. Like there are some males that I've come across in my work that also present with very similar symptoms, where they are very high functioning, they're very high achieving, but behind closed doors, they have this worrying thoughts. They're always ruminating, they're always worrying to disappoint others. So I think it's from my perspective, I come across males and females, but I also understand how from other people's perspectives it is mainly like a female um
Mm.
sort of community where everyone relates. Whereas I feel like maybe with the males, people don't talk about it enough. So when they come into therapy, I see that side because I'm in that therapy space. Whereas women are more open to want to discuss these, like, yeah, that's me. I'm like that. I always have to do everything in the house. I'm always having to take care of everyone else. What about me? And that's the little question underneath is, what about me? What about me? People don't see me. But often it goes back to being that young child that we once were and looking at everyone and creating a narrative of, there's no space for me. I can't use this space because people are too busy, or I upset people, or I don't want to be too much because I'm not going to get loved. So we carry through these patterns. Yeah, like it's really, really sad, isn't it? That as a child, that child still lives within us. And even as adults, we are afraid to take up space. Like I know people, they won't put their hand up and ask a question in a group setting because they're like, I don't want to take up the space. They may not, if they get a wrong coffee at a coffee shop, they may not want to go back because there's a queue of people behind them and they're like, I don't want to take up space. So every day it shows up. So it shows up in your everyday life in these decisions because these patterns are really, really subconscious and they show up constantly.
So you mentioned there that obviously there's a child in us that is still feeling that way, and I know I asked you half a dozen questions in one, which is terrible. I got too many thoughts in my head, and I kind of brought them all out at once. So we'll go back to the do you the sort of solutions or
Mm,
the advice that you give people, does it depend on how old they are? Because if we're lucky and we manage to catch someone when they're younger and explain to them you don't have to carry this, I wish that children and young adults
yeah.
would not just see all this stuff on TikTok and take on even more of a burden, I suppose, of this, and they're bombarded with different, not necessarily brilliant advice. But what would you say? Say if there are any mothers listening,
Mm,
thinking, "Oh my gosh, that's my son, that's my daughter." What advice would you give to them to maybe pass on? And what if they're thinking, actually, that resonates with me? Would it
mm.
be the same advice that's for a younger person as an adult?
For me, everyone is very different and
Okay.
everyone has their own experiences. Like someone doing meditation, it will work. Someone doing yoga, that will work for them. Someone else might be like, that is not for me. I prefer journaling, or I prefer talking to someone, or I prefer doing like going for short works and short walks and working in that way. So I think it's rather than putting people in boxes and thinking this is what they need, it's trying to understand what people's needs are. So what works for them. And we're not going to know straight away. It's like a lifestyle change. So you might try journaling and you think, oh, this really works for me. But then
Mhm.
you might try meditations and you think this really works for me. But ideally, it's trying to become more self aware of your patterns and then to try and understand where they come from. And that's why in the book, I split it into two sections. So there is the unlearning, where we go back and make sense of the beliefs that sort of like are lurking underneath, then to be able to then move forward. So the next or the second half of the book is all about learning and how do we show up. So in my final chapter, I go through like the 12 powers that you can use, and in there it's like you picking and choosing what works for you, and it's trial and error. And as you said, Andrea, it's every wherever we are in life, something different will work. So I know yoga really works for me. I know meditations really work for me. But when I think back to my 18-year-old self, that would never have worked for me. That would have been like, I'm not doing that. So I think it depends on where you're at, but it's also your level of awareness. And you also need to want to help yourself, because if you're forcing and you're saying, no, 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 I don't need the help, you're going to have your blinkers on. So you're not going to want to help yourself, because right now it's like, I'm coping fine. I don't need anything else. But it's only until we start realizing and seeing that this isn't serving me and want to be like, what else can I do? Because we're so comfortable in this way of being. It's only until that way doesn't work anymore that we think, okay, I need to do something. So even with young people, with adults, it gets to a point where we start noticing it's impacting on our physical body, it's impacting on our thoughts, on how we're presenting every day, that's impacting on our everyday um just everyday life in some shape or form. Even like getting ready for work or for school, like it can really have an impact. So it's like, what can you do for yourself in that space then? Is it going into a therapy space? Is it just starting to change little habits in the day, like not starting your day being like chaotic, maybe just giving yourself 5-10 minutes in the morning just to ground yourself back in, not picking up your phone straight away and looking at everything else and what everyone else is up to, and then feeling quite dysregulated because you think, oh, everyone else has it together, I don't, look at my life. So I think it's making these small changes to really help yourself.
I was speaking with, funny enough, my husband the other day, and we were talking about this actually, about, because he's a coach and he works with mainly men, but he does work with women as well, and that how anxiety presents itself in
Yeah.
overlapping ways, I suppose. And we were discussing the fact that I personally find it very useful when I find myself starting to whir. I describe it as whirring. I can feel myself getting very anxious or stressed. I I'm a quite an introspective person, so I like to do yoga, I like to meditate, I like anything that helps me feel like I'm getting back into flow.
Yeah.
He's a very physical person, as in he likes to expel. And he said, maybe what you need to do is go for a drive in the car and just yell at the top of your voice and just keep yelling until like this, until it's all kind of gone, and then you're exhausted, and then it's sort of gone, and then drive back home and pull up in the driveway. And we were laughing about it, about these two different ways. But it got me thinking, is a lot of the things that you were talking about there, they are about slowing down, they're
Mm,
about regulating, because anxiety tends to be a feeling of worrying. But is it that it's down to the individual, that for some people
yeah.
it's about regulating and slowing down, and for other it's about release? So it's about go to a boxing class, do something that is expelling this energy. Is it about finding what works for you?
Yeah, definitely. And also it's like trying to understand if you've got this like burst of energy and you've got this adrenaline going on because your body's in this fight or flight, like I need to do something, slowing down, that may not work for you. So you need to like do something to release that energy. So even like with kids, when they are feeling that frustration or that dysregulation, like doing things like even star jumps or something with them and teaching them to be like, okay, let's do this, let's come out of this, and then having a chat with them once they're calm and they're regulated, and then you can have that discussion with them like, well, what went on there, what happened, should we talk about this? But when you're trying to do it when they are dysregulated, it's not going to work. And it's the same with people in our relationships. Is if we know that we're quite anxious and you're telling someone, okay, talk to me about what's going on here now, what are you feeling, they're in like life or death situation. They think they're in that, their body feels like there's danger and they are trying to keep themselves safe. So having a conversation like that at that time, it's not going to help the other individual, but it's like giving that person perhaps some space or the tools to be able to know, what do I do when I'm feeling that way?
If you see someone, whether it's a friend or a family member or a partner or something like that, and you to you they just seem a little bit off. And
Yeah.
as you mentioned the word masking, people are very good at masking
Yeah.
when they are operating at a high level, so it's high functioning anxiety, but you can sense that there's something a little bit off. What are
Mm.
the things that maybe you can look out for in someone that you care about or that you work with, that can maybe let you see, do you know what, this person is operating at a level of high functioning anxiety, and how can you be a support to them?
Andrea, it's so important that you ask that question, because from my perspective, every time I share a post on masking anxiety on my Instagram, it always does really, really well, because there's so many people that relate to it, because everyone feels like that's me, that's me, that's me, where they feel like they have to pretend to be okay, but they're not okay. And in the background, and sometimes you can sense, if you're a sensitive individual, you can sense, okay, something's not all okay with this person, or they're not usually acting the way that they are. And sometimes I think it's about having just a conversation like, are you okay? Is there anything that you want to discuss? Because I've noticed X, Y, and Z. So you're talking about the elephant in the room. And now the other person has their space to say, yes, there is something going on, or there isn't. But sometimes when we are when we are high functioning, we are also hyper independent, and we're not used to asking and reaching out for some support, because we're like, I'll do it myself. I don't trust people. And that again becomes the child within them. The child within them is, I don't trust anyone. People are going to let me down, or people are going to hurt me. And that's the healing that we need to do in order to then show up in the world where it's okay to ask for some support. And if people can't give us the support, it's not because we aren't enough. It's because perhaps there's something going on here, but you're not then personalizing it. So when you do notice, I think my sort of advice would be, just ask the question, bring up the elephant in the room and say, hey, look, I've noticed this. Is everything okay? And they might feel very defensive because you've spotted something that they're not used to someone seeing, because they're so always used to sort of masking. But you're going in a very safe, you're not saying, you've made me feel upset because you're acting like this. Like you're going in a very safe way to try and ask and to nurture what's going on. But we also need to respect, if someone says everything's fine, we have to be okay with that as well, as an adult. Obviously, if it's just a child, it's a little bit different, because you'll just monitor then what's going on, or just say, look, should we go maybe should we go out for a tea? Should we go out and for a walk? And then starting a conversation that way, whilst they're busy doing something, you're having a conversation, so it doesn't feel so, right, let's sit down and talk about what's going on. Often young people, they don't want to do that. So when you're doing something with them and then bringing up a conversation, that can always help.
I remember the first time I ever had what I now see was a panic attack
Mm.
was I was in my 20s and I was working as a journalist and I was in an office in London and um, I started having one sitting at my desk. And I can remember there was a man in the office, he was an older man, who someone had made some kind of passing comment about he's a bit weird. Every now and again he gets a bit stressed, so he goes out for a walk. And they were quite disparaging about him. But I could feel this feeling coming, and I didn't really know him very well. But I went into his office and I said, "Hey," his name, "could you maybe come for a walk with me?" And he looked at me, and God love him, he instantly understood what was happening. He went, "Absolutely," and he put down what he was doing, and we walked around the block. And
Oh,
I said to him, "I can't breathe. I don't know what's happening. I feel really weird. I have pins and needles all over my body." And he said, "You're having a panic attack. It's fine. You're just feeling overwhelmed." We walked around the block about 3 times because I'd get back to work and go, "I'm not ready to go in. I can't go in." You go, "That's fine. We'll walk around the block again." That was in the early 90s. So no one had really, it wasn't in the public domain as much as it is now. But
yeah.
I will always remember, his name was Mike, I will say his name,
Mm.
how wonderful he was to me. The fact that he didn't judge, he instantly understood what was happening.
Yeah.
And he did what I now see is known as changing your state. He got
Mm.
me out of the environment that was making me feel very, very stressed. He introduced some action. So we were moving. So I was moving my body, which of course helps with releasing stress. And he very cleverly was talking to me sideways, which is
Yeah.
something that I've utilized
Yeah.
with my kids since
Yeah.
they were tiny. If there's something that I can see is maybe worrying them a little bit, I'll ask them, should we go for a walk? Or should we go for a drive in the car? And never confront someone face on because it
Yeah.
feels like another pressure. Talking to someone sideways, changing their state, removing them from the environment that is stressing them out, and actually just letting them see that you understand
Yeah.
is so powerful. So the rest of the office, then no one really noticed that we'd gone. We just walked around the block a few times and came back, and I said, "Thank you so much." And he went back to his bit of the office, and I went back to mine and carried on typing. We never spoke of it again. But even knowing you can do that for someone at work is huge.
Yeah. And look how safe that felt. And it's something that you carry in your heart right now. Like you never forget how the kindness of someone else and someone not being judgmental towards you. It was just like, I'm just gonna let you be. I'm gonna let you be and come on, I'm with you on this. And I think that's a beautiful thing to do, even when we are with people and we see them struggling. It's like let them be, but it's also we're there. And sometimes we want to fix it, but that's us and that's our stuff that's going on because we feel like we want to make it better and we want it to go away for them. But we also need to sit with what's going on there for us.
How much of high functioning anxiety is about control? Because there's so much in our world right now that is out of our control. I think because we have such easy access to global news, it feels like the world is on fire right now.
Mm,
And because there is so much discord and disconnect, but we're seeing it. These things are wonderful, but they're bringing everything so much closer to us.
yeah.
So how much is high functioning anxiety about trying to regain some kind of control in a world that feels uncontrollable?
So one of the traits of high functioning anxiety is the perfectionist, and the perfectionist is all about trying to do things perfectly. So we're constantly analyzing and looking at the world around us, and we want to present being perfect. Now, perfect means we need to have control of things. That also means that we become over responsible. We don't really give or allocate tasks to other people because we don't trust that they'll do it in the way that we will do it. So we then end up with all of this stuff that we're trying to do and manage by ourselves because we feel like we can't really give it to anyone else. So it is about, okay, I'll do this at this time, I'll do this, I'll do this. And you might say to someone, I'll meet you at 7 o'clock, 7:30, they're still not there. And that's it. It can really dysregulate you because you don't feel like you're in control. Control has a big part to play in high functioning anxiety. And it's often again because we want to show we're okay. We want to show that we've got it together. And it all comes back down to what will people think? What will people think if I'm not perfect? What will people think if I'm not able to meet these deadlines, if I don't show up presentable, if I don't show up in a certain way? And that's the when we start overcoming high functioning anxiety, it's you don't care about what people think as much. You're not attuned to everyone else and personalizing it. You're actually coming from the inside out, which is such a beautiful state to be in.
Would you say that there's two different types of personality then that experience high functioning anxiety? So there's maybe someone who's incredibly empathetic and they feel the emotions of everyone else and they're very caring and they take on too much, I suppose, in terms of wanting to be there for everyone, not wanting to, as we mentioned before, take up too much space or be any trouble, and this kind of thing. Or you mentioned, taking your coffee back even if it's wrong because there's a big queue and you don't know butt in. Or someone who has taken it upon themselves that they are the responsible one and they are the one that's going to make sure that absolutely everything is perfect. Two very different personality types, but actually what they're experiencing is the same.
Yeah, definitely. And also, like, even the perfectionist, I think that there's a part of them that is the sensitive one. So they notice that, or maybe once upon a time they grew up believing that their attachments and their caregivers, they had to take that responsibility because mom was busy or dad was always upset or dad was dysregulated in some way. So they would have personalized that, become sensitive to their attachments needs, and learned to just shut down their sensitivity, because it's like, my needs don't matter here. I need, these other needs are more important. So let me become and support and be the nurturer of these and the caregiver of these and make it better. And it may be that your parents didn't say that, but that's what would have felt. And that became the narrative moving forward. So you show up as being this, like, the strong one, but you're also underneath the sensitive one. And you've locked that part of you away. And in that part that you've locked away, there's so much magic. Like, I remember even in my own experiences, I was like, I'm not sensitive. I'm not emotional, but actually I'm a very sensitive, a very emotional person. Now I embrace it. If I get upset, I'm like, yeah, this is really sad. Whereas once upon a time, I would never, ever, no one would ever see any emotion because I was just masking it all the time. So it is about, like, trying to understand, okay, why do I show up this way? But also embracing that sensitivity. And that's something I go through in the book, because it's about self-trust. Because from a young child, you learn not to trust yourself, not to trust your intuition, but learn to just live by what you needed to do for others. And as you're moving through life, then you're living for others. So you don't know how to live and ask yourself, what is it that I need? So the number of people that I hear when they start the journey of self-discovery is, but I don't know who I am. I don't know. And I don't want to stop doing this, because if I stop doing that, this is really uncomfortable and I don't know anything about this. And that can feel really scary. But when you start, honestly, it all falls into place.
As a parent, and again, there'll be people listening to this who think,
Yeah.
I am more aware of this kind of thing now because of conversations like the ones that we're having now. What can I do to hold space for my children, whether they are younger children, whether they are teenagers, to let them know that it's all right. You don't have to be the responsible one. You
Yeah.
don't have to be this person that maybe I've unknowingly sent messages to you that, there's chaos over here, but thank God you're so good. Thank
Yeah.
God that you're the one. I don't have to worry about you because you're all okay. That we've mistakenly sort of lumped that on our kids. And there's a few people I'm thinking of that I absolutely know they'll be horrified to think, do you know, I think I've done that. What advice would you give to parents who may be experiencing this?
I think as a parent, we're not perfect, are we? We're not perfect at all. There's going to be things that come up and you think, oh, and often our kids, they are bringing up shadow parts for us. So we are constantly being like, what's this about? And why am I feeling this with this? And what's coming up for me? So your kids are a reflection of you, and they're bringing up parts for you that you've never sort of had to come across. So now you're having to sit with them and think, oh, what is this? And it's not about beating yourself up, but also it's perhaps offering a space, creating a space where you and your child can connect in some way, not watching TV. Maybe it's going for a walk. Maybe it's like, it becomes a thing that you have that connection space, because often when children feel like, oh, I can't really, my parents aren't available to me, they then take it upon themselves to just get on with it themselves. And there's a real disconnect between parent and child then. But if you start creating a space, and it might just be something like, oh, let's build a shelf together, or let's do this together, it becomes, there's something around connection there, real connection, and you're building up the safety. And then you can start integrating conversations like, how was your day? Or what was one good thing about your day? So even just saying that at the end of a day, it's again the child being heard, the child like, oh, okay, there's room here for me. But really tuning in and listen in, and try to understand like where they're coming from. So you're growing with them, and you're offering that space is so important for kids to be seen, kids to be heard. Like, that's a really powerful space for them, and that it goes back to safety and security as well.
I want to finish by asking you about working with individuals of whatever age
Yeah.
who are either doing some work on themselves and recognizing, okay, these are things that I'm having problems with, and perhaps either you've helped them with their diagnosis, or someone has said to them, "Do you know what? I think you might have ADHD. I think you might be somewhere on the spectrum." And this is something that we're hearing
Mm,
increasing amounts about. It's I actually think it's wonderful. I think it's great that people are getting a greater understanding of who they are. And it's not necessarily labeling. It's just it's understanding, gosh, this is what makes me this amazingly unique person. And this is why I feel this way. So I suppose there's two questions that I want to ask you. One is, how do you feel about the increasing diagnoses of things like ADHD? And would you encourage someone who maybe they have been working at a level with high functioning anxiety
yeah.
to maybe go and see if they can get assessed, because then they can get a greater understanding of why they feel the way they do, and maybe have a better understanding of the tools they can implement that'll help them.
Yeah. So when, in terms of like diagnoses, I know that there's a lot of individuals who are being diagnosed, or they think there's something going on for their young child. But even adults, I know there's a lot of adults who are going down the diagnosis route. And there's a few sort of things that I've read, or people saying like it all makes sense. And I think what people are looking for is this understanding of why is it that I think in this way? Why is it that I act in this way? And people want that community of people who get it, who understand it. So as soon as they are in that space, it's like, I get it. I get it. Everything makes sense now. And then it's not about shaming themselves or feeling like there's something wrong with them, but it's almost like, I understand why I am what I am. But it's not you become the identity or you become the label. That's not what we're saying. You're not the label. What you're saying is the label helps you to understand who you are, and you're then integrating it. But you're not going around saying, I am ADHD, I am this, I am, because it's a part of like how you understand how your brain is. And then moving on from the high functioning anxiety side, so that's actually not a diagnosis, and it's more of like, it's a preventative way of seeing things. But people that are high functioning, you'd never think that they're going through anything, because they are constantly showing up that they've got everything together. But it's for them to realize this is what high functioning anxiety is. And like I said, the amount of people that have said, oh my God, that's me, that's me, that's me. And it's like, we need to talk about this, because people think anxiety is like, oh, I'm having a panic attack, I can't breathe, I can't do this. But high functioning anxiety, they think, oh, but there's nothing wrong with me, I'm still able to do everything. But it's like, no, how is it impacting on you? Like, even when we think of loneliness, it's like having 15 cigarettes in a day. That's what deep loneliness can do to our physical body. So it is so important to look after ourselves and learn to self-care before you get to the point where it hits burnout and you're not able to move forward. Because I've seen that happen where people get to the point where eventually, oh, being over responsible, it does lead to that place. So really, just if you are identifying with high functioning anxiety, start to become aware of what is it that may be going on. Start becoming curious of like your patterns of behavior. And there's so many different podcasts, there's self-help books, there's reaching out to a professional or a therapist. There's so many different routes that you can go down to try and understand more. But don't be afraid, and it's one step that can really change your life.
Perfect. That is such a great place to end. Thank you so, so much for
Thank you.
today. Where can people reach you if they want to reach out to you?
So people can reach me on Instagram. It's at dr dot, and then my name, Lalitaa, Lalita. You can reach out there, you can DM me there, and I'll always get back to you. And I have a book, High Functioning Anxiety. So you can also get that if you type it into Google. It'll come up as the first one there.
And I will put the link up for
Thank
everybody
you.
as well, so that they can rush out and buy it. Thank you so much for today.
Thank you, Andrea. Take care.
I hope you've enjoyed today's conversation. Remember to like and subscribe to this channel so you never miss a thing.